Thank you everyone for joining us today for a important discussion on Local Law 97 and specifically Article 321. We're also going to cover some of the rule updates that were released at the end of last year, in December of 2023. We're here today with UHAB and New York City Accelerator. And let's, anyone participating, if you are missing something, we will send out a link to the recording and a copy of the slide deck afterwards. For the agenda today, we're going to do some brief introductions, and we'll hear from UHAB. Then we'll turn it over to Marissa at New York City Accelerator, talk about Local Law 97. We'll talk about some of the rule updates and look at some case studies and open it up at the end for some questions and answers. So briefly about BES, Building Efficiency Services. My name is Ari, and I'm a VP at BES. We primarily help buildings with their steam distribution systems. We work with multifamily and commercial buildings. We work on steam system balancing. We also have conversations with buildings about electrification options. And of course, Local Law 97 compliance and incentives. So we'll help buildings capture and apply, for all energy rebates and the regulatory filing for Local Law 97. We've upgraded over 300 New York City buildings, serviced 70,000 radiators, and saved over 3 million therms. With us today, of course, UHAB helps build power in tenant and co-op communities so they can continue to advance racial, social, economic, and environmental justice through cooperation. And New York City Accelerator, we have Marissa Morris, an account manager. New York City Accelerator is a task force from the mayor's office. If you're not familiar with them, they've been helping advise and educate building owners and management companies on compliance with Local Law 97. So I want to turn it over now to Caleb Whale at UHAB. Caleb, please go ahead.
Great, thanks, Ari. Hi, everyone. Welcome to all of our attendees. It's great to see you all this evening. As Ari mentioned, my name is Caleb Weil. I work with UHAB's Climate and Resiliency team. So we work primarily with HDFC co-ops, helping to connect them to programs and resources to make their buildings more efficient and affordable. That said, I know not everybody here tonight is a resident of an HDFC cooperative, but my contact information is at the end. I'd be happy to talk to any of you, even if you're not in an HDFC cooperative. Please feel free to reach out to me, especially if you are a representative of or a resident of Mitchell-Lama or another form of cooperative in New York City. There are certainly programs that we can help get you connected with and resources that we can point you towards. But as far as UHAB's member services goes, the Climate and Resiliency team is part of the member services department. We have a number of programs that are available to HDFC cooperatives, including our bulk purchasing programs, Flip and UHAB Fuel, which use the purchasing power of our HDFC community to negotiate for lower prices on heating oil and insurance, respectively. We have trainings and special seminars, including our operation and maintenance training class, which will give you tips on how to cut costs in your building by operating and maintaining it more affordably. I'll post a link in the chat to that after my bit of the presentation. It's open to all and definitely really useful, especially if you live in a resident-owned property. We also have co-op accounting services, bookkeeping, and connected books, market and match program, which will help to market your vacancies in your buildings and connect prospective buyers to buildings that have units for sale. We also have energy programs. We have a Co-ops Go Solar program, which has connected almost 30 HDFCs throughout New York City to rooftop and community solar. We have benchmarking services and general energy advisement for those of you looking to become more energy efficient or comply with local laws. We can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, and more specifically, the Climate and Resiliency Team connects co-op residents to resources so that they can lead the way to a carbon-free future. We increase access to energy efficiency measures to fight climate change and keep housing safe, healthy, and affordable. We could go to the next slide. So just before we get into the specifics of Local Law 97, and I pass things over to the experts for this evening, want to just provide a little bit of background and context. Why are we talking about energy efficiency? So Local Law 97 is a law that is aimed at reducing emissions from buildings, and this happens by becoming more energy efficient. But there are a number of benefits to energy efficiency, including to just the environment, but also to your building's finances. Improving the energy efficiency of your building reduces the cost and consumption associated with operating your building systems. Reducing costs eases the energy burden on families, which promotes financial health. Energy burden is when residents spend more than 6% of their income on energy costs. A lot of cooperatives throughout New York City are located in areas that have been historically disinvested in. This causes something called deferred maintenance, where buildings are dealing with old, inefficient systems. And these old and inefficient systems are expensive to run because they're not operating efficiently. And thus, buildings are having to spend more of their income on just day-to-day operating costs, so they're not able to save for measures that would reduce their energy usage in the long run and thus ease that energy burden. Yeah, we could go to the next slide, please.
Oh, weil wir beliebt haben, bis zum Ende habe ich beküsslich. Ja, der war eklig, Digga. Der war nass!
Thanks. Looks like we had a little Zoom bomber in there. So
Sorry about that.
thanks for getting to that mute button. Another thing that can happen with deferred maintenance is it causes the building systems to degrade. Degraded housing stock causes dangerous conditions like poor indoor air quality and pests. As we'll talk about more later, 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions in New York City come from buildings, just because of the nature of how the city operates. We're not like LA, where we're having a ton of car traffic. We have, robust public transit, which is reducing some of that, but we have such a density of buildings, and it's the buildings themselves that are resulting in these emissions, which can degrade the air quality. Better air quality also reduces the severity of respiratory illnesses like asthma and COVID-19. Next slide, please. Low-income neighborhoods oftentimes have the worst air quality and the most building maintenance issues. A study concluded that a small increase in long-term exposure to air pollution leads to an increase in the COVID-19 mortality rate, and reducing carbon emissions is standing up for the most vulnerable New Yorkers, including the elderly, children, and the immunocompromised. We can go to the next slide. And I will pass things back to Ari.
Thank you very much, Caleb. And we're going to call now on Marissa from New York City Accelerator. Marissa, please take it away.
Thanks, Ari. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, really. Thank you all so much for joining our session today. As Ari already introduced me, my name is Marissa. I am a New York City Accelerator account manager. Just a little bit of information on our program. The New York City Accelerator works with thousands of buildings across the 5 boroughs to build a cleaner future by lowering pollution and reducing carbon emissions. Who's eligible to work with us is any privately owned New York City building that's over 5,000 square feet. Any smaller buildings can be referred to partner programs and organizations. So if you do have some in your portfolios that are under that square footage, we're happy to help. And how does it work? You reach out to us and you get connected with an account manager like myself, and then we give you objective advice customized to your needs. How much does it cost and what's the catch? There's absolutely no catch or cost or sign up or commitment. We're a completely free advisory service through the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. So happy to help however you need that assistance. Next slide, please. So to talk about Local Law 97, we have to talk about where we are as a city. So in New York City, we're in a very unique position where nearly 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from our buildings, and 90% of those buildings are still going to be here by 2050. So we have to look at retrofitting these buildings, making them more energy efficient to be able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So the Climate Mobilization Act. I'm sure you've all heard of Local Law 97. That is a part of the Climate Mobilization Act. It's the largest climate solution put forth by any city in the world, and it consists of multiple different local laws centered around reducing our carbon emissions. So this includes Local Law 92 and 94, and that's the green roof and solar PV mandates. And Local Law 33 and 95, and that establishes energy efficiency grades. Local Law 96, that establishes PACE financing, and Local Law 97, which establishes carbon emissions intensity limits for buildings that are over 25,000 square feet. So as a quick overview for Local Law 97, this requires most buildings over 25,000 square feet to meet ambitious carbon reduction targets. And there are two main sections of the law. It's Article 320, which outlines emission limits for different occupancy types. So starting this year in 2024, with increasingly stringent carbon caps every 5 years until 2050. So it's super important to get to work today because Local Law 97, the emission limit starts this year. There's also Article 321. This establishes an alternative pathway for certain types of affordable housing, and we'll get into the nuances in a bit. And this gives you a choice of either complying under the prescriptive pathway or meeting the 2030 emission limit by the end of 2024. I linked two really important links on that slide. The first one is the Local Law 97 guidance for affordable housing through HPD. That's a really good place to start if you're looking for some more information. And the Local Law 97 covered building list. If you're not sure, or if you're close to that 25,000 square foot limit, you're not sure if your building needs to comply, definitely start there. Check if your building is on that covered building list. And if it is, then get in touch with us to see what you need to do to comply. So as I said, it's broken up. Local 97 is broken up into a couple of different articles, Article 320 and 321. The aim is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. So under Local Law 97, affordable housing is treated somewhat differently, and it can fall into 3 different buckets. And in 2022, DOB released the first rule package to provide some clarity for owners. And then in 2023, they released the second package, and this includes some more information on Article 321, the penalties and penalty mitigation opportunities, and we'll talk about that in the next slides. So this is how affordable housing would comply under the law. As I said, it can be broken down into 3 different buckets. The first one is under Article 321, which is the prescriptive pathway. This is for buildings with over 35% rent regulated units, HDFC co-ops, buildings with at least 1 unit with federal project-based funding. So that's like Section 8, 202, 811, and NYCHA Pact and RAD buildings. For the 2026 pathway, this is for buildings that have at least 1 rent regulated unit, but up to and less than 35% of rent regulated units. And these buildings have a delayed compliance of 2026. Then there's the 2035 pathway. This applies to Mitchell-Lama rentals and co-ops with no federal project-based funding, or buildings that have no rent regulated units and at least 1 or more income restricted unit. But we'll talk about each of them and what the compliance requirements look like in the next slide. So the first pathway that I mentioned, which is the prescriptive pathway, I already talked about the type of housing that would comply under this pathway. The compliance requirement for these buildings are either to comply with the 2030 emission limits by the end of this year, or implement the applicable prescriptive energy conservation measures, or PECMs, by the end of this year. And we'll talk about both those pathways. The first report is due for this cohort of buildings May 1st of 2025. And for this, we would definitely suggest referring to the Article 321 filing guide, and Ari will talk about that a little bit more later. The penalties set for this pathway: failure to report is a $10,000 fine, and failure to comply is a $10,000 fine. There are some penalty mitigation opportunities for this pathway if you're not sure you're going to complete everything by the end of this year. This includes unexpected events, some eligible energy conservation projects, and mediated resolution. And if this is something that you need some more information on, absolutely reach out to us and we can give you some more information on these penalty mitigation opportunities. The other two types of affordable housing that falls under Article 320 but have delayed compliance requirements are the two different ones that I brought up before: the 2026 pathway and the 2035 pathway. The first one, buildings with at least one rent regulating unit, but up to 35%. The compliance requirement is you would comply with emission limits starting in 2026. So that's in 2 years. The very first annual report is due May 1st of 2027. And the penalties are aligned with every other building, like market rate buildings. So it's a failure to report, it's the floor area times 50 cents, and that's per month penalty. And failure to comply is $268 per ton. Thank you. There are some penalty mitigation opportunities for this pathway specifically. That's unexpected events or good faith efforts. For the 2035 pathway, this applies to those Mitchell-Lama buildings with no federal project-based funding and buildings that have no rent regulating units, but at least one or more that are income restricted. The buildings in this pathway would have a delayed compliance until 2035, filing that first report May 1st of 2036, and there will be some penalty mitigation opportunities that will be released in a future rules package. Just for some information, if one of your buildings fall in between any of these pathways, it really makes sense to start doing work now. 50% of buildings already don't meet those 2030 limits, and around 75% of buildings do not meet the 2035 limits. So there's definitely work to be done if your building does fall into these pathways, although there is that delayed compliance. For some other notes, by 2040, most buildings will probably have to be partially electric. And by 2050, buildings will need to be carbon neutral to avoid steep penalties. So as I said, if you fall under any of these pathways, reach out to us so we can start to develop a plan. Here are all of those dates listed out in into one timeline in detail. The couple of different things that I want to point out is 2024, that is when emission limits begin. So it's super important to see how your building falls and how they need to comply. And 2025 is when the first compliance report is due for Article 321 buildings. First and only, report is due for Article 321 buildings. And then highlighted in blue there is that 2026 pathway, and in green, that 2035 pathway. So super important to figure out what dates on this timeline is important for you and your property. As I mentioned, under Article 321, there are those two pathways to compliance. You would either demonstrate that by 2024, the building is below your 2030 emission limits. This you would use your Local Law 84 benchmarking data to determine. And then by May of 2025, you have to file a report with DOB, certified by a registered design professional, that for the year 2024, your building was under the limits. Or you would implement all the applicable prescriptive energy conservation measures, or PECMs, and then by May of 2025, submit a report that certifies that all of them are completed by a retro commissioning agent. I mentioned the 13 prescriptive measures. Here they are. Just to go over them very briefly, they're broken down into general measures, ones that are particular to steam systems, and ones that are good maintenance practices. The first ones are installing temperature controls, insulating all exposed and accessible pipes for heating and or hot water, installing heating system sensors and boiler controls, installing radiant barriers behind certain radiators, installing timers on intermittent exhaust fans, upgrading the common area lighting, and this aligns with local law 154, and weatherizing and air sealing. For steam systems, you would have to do all the general plus these, which is replacing or repairing all steam traps, upgrading steam system master venting, and insulating steam system condensate tank, and then some maintenance measures that all buildings will need to and make sure are taken care of as well are adjusting temperature set points for heat and hot water, repairing all heating system leaks, and maintaining heating systems. For all of these measures, there are, well, for all of these with a blue check, and some of the check marks are a little bit skewed, but for all the ones with the blue check there, those can be incentivized through different incentive programs. So there is some money out there to help get these measures done, but definitely reach out to figure out what your scope is so we can point you in the right direction. For Article 320 and meeting those greenhouse gas emission limits, this outlines under Article 320, it outlines the emission limits for each building. For affordable housing, if you fall under Article 321, you should definitely consider maybe meeting that 2030 limit if you're already performing close to that 2030 limit, or if you're planning deep retrofits to your building, you're already planning on electrification, it makes sense for you to comply under the 2030 limit pathway instead. The plan of action, determine how your building is performing in relation to those limits, then create a building energy efficiency plan and choosing projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to then meet your 2030 limit. How can the New York City Accelerator help you? If you are not really sure where to begin, we can absolutely walk you through all the Local Law 97 requirements for your building. First, making sure we clarify those requirements for your property specifically, identify your greenhouse gas emissions and compare them to the limits for your property. Then determine which pathway is appropriate for a building. Does it make sense to meet that 2030 limit, or does it make sense to implement the prescriptive measures? We can then help you identify applicable financing and incentive programs, as I mentioned, and assemble a team of service providers, and then provide project management and support through project completion. So from A to Z, if you have any questions, we can help you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ari. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marissa. I just maybe want to say that we've been working closely with Marissa and her team at New York City Accelerator. She's super helpful. We've gained a lot from her expertise. The entire team there really does a phenomenal job. So if you have any questions about Local Law 97, definitely reach out to Marissa. Her contact information will be on the last slide. Let's do that one more time. Okay. So let's talk about some rule updates. These came out at the end of 2023. And just want to point out that when the news first dropped in December, there was some language there that we at Building Efficiency Services were unclear about. So we reached out directly to the Department of Buildings, the DOB, and we just screen captures. This is from Michael writing them. Michael's our CEO at BES. And we wanted to know that if we write to the DOB at GHG Emissions and we get a response, is that considered a definitive legal answer? And they wrote back, yes, that is correct. So for anyone out there, if you have any questions specifically, it takes a little while to get a response from them. They can get pretty backed up, but save the response, save that email if you have an important question to ask them. So one question we had, was regarding TRVs and radiant barriers, and are they needed for one pipe steam radiators? And the answer we got back from them is TRVs or TREs, which are the enclosures around the radiators. They're required for one pipe steam systems, except where the distribution piping has a proper system-wide venting and where wireless sensors have been installed in at least 25% of the dwelling units. Now, as far as the affordable pathway for Article 321, those happen to be 2 of the 13 measures, right? Master venting and an EMS system with sensors in the dwelling units. In other words, if you are going to do the affordable pathway properly, and it's a one-pipe steam system building, then that would not require TRVs. TRVs throughout a large building can be quite costly. So that was a good piece of news for large buildings. At least 80% of the radiators in the building must be surveyed to confirm whether temperature controls, those are TRVs, are installed and functioning. However, last sentence there, where overheating has been reported, despite having proper steam system venting, they require TRV. So if the super or management are getting complaints, then that may kick in a requirement for installing TRVs. And regarding radiant barriers, the rule in the filing guide, and there's a link to it below, is that where TRVs are required, radiant barriers are as well. So again, TRVs and radiant barriers, if you're fulfilling the 13 measures in a one-pipe steam system building, they would not be required unless there are complaints. So this was also a very common question. We were getting it a lot, and we had a lot of uncertainty ourselves. And this is regarding the penalty. The penalty, as Marissa had covered, is $10,000 for not filing and $10,000 for not completing the pathway, $20,000 in total. And some buildings are making the calculation that perhaps in their circumstances, accepting a penalty might be a way to deal with local law 97. Now, I should just also mention that as Caleb pointed out, that performing local law, the 13 measures, is not just about compliance with local law 97. It's also about reducing your operating costs, reducing your energy consumption. But that said, every building has their own set of circumstances, and people were looking at this that maybe this is the answer. However, they responded that buildings that meet the definition of a covered building for Article 321 are subject to the penalties. This includes $10,000 for not submitting and $10,000 for failure to demonstrate compliance. And finally, the DOB has discretion to issue recurring penalties until such violations are corrected. Now, we happen to have been exhibiting recently in February at the New York Build Expo, and we spoke at the show with some DOB personnel at the show, and they clarified for us, not in writing, this what you're seeing on the screen is verbatim in writing from them, that would apply for both penalties, the $10,000 for not filing and the $10,000 for failure to demonstrate compliance. But the wording is that the DOB has discretion, which seems to me that they are probably taking a little bit of a wait and see approach, and to see how buildings respond to this. Obviously, what New York City would like to see, the DOB would like to see, is buildings complying with and demonstrating the 13 measures in the affordable pathway or meeting the 2030 limits, but they retain the discretion to make those penalties recurring, so it's not a one-time deal. Some additional inquiries, and this came from New York City Accelerator actually. Temperature controls, which are TRVs for hydronic systems, they do not need to add new controls, right? If they are present already, they need to be functioning, but no new controls on a hydronic heating system. Radiant barriers on baseboard heating does not need to be installed. Do you need to take off radiator covers to install radiant barriers if it's necessary to install barriers? The answer is yes. And what's the real number for 100% in units? So the original text was, we go back a couple of slides, it said that every single unit needs to be inspected for working temperature controls, but we know, contractors in the field doing steam system balancing, we almost never get 100%. We'll get to 98%, 97%. There's always a few units that, the tenant may be overseas or just unavailable or for whatever reason. And the answer was to document the units that we can't get access to, how many attempts are made, et cetera. So keep a record of the attempts you've made to access every unit. The filing guide, Marissa had left a link to that as well. It's on this slide as well. But some of those answers that we had gotten from the DOB then showed up in the filing guide, which was released in January. You can see some of that language verbatim. TRVs or insulated radiator enclosures are required for one-pipe steam systems. And also at the top requirements, it says at least 80% of all radiators must be surveyed. So I kind of changed a little bit from all units must be surveyed to at least 80%. And this comes directly from the filing guide that was released in January. Regarding the TRVs, maybe one last point. This is not required, but listed as a best practice that on the radiators closest to the boiler, that means maybe on the first floor, maybe on the second floor, where the steam pressure is getting the most pressure closest to the boiler, TRVs may still be worthwhile and effective to install even in a one-pipe steam system where it's not required. So let's talk a little bit about some case studies. As a preface to that, there was a report in 2019 by the Urban Green Council called Demystifying Steam. And we've already heard from both Caleb and Marissa that 70% of energy usage in New York City is coming from heating. And because it's the biggest expense, it also has the biggest opportunity for savings. And cost-effective solutions can reduce heating and hot water expenses by up to 20%. So while a lot of buildings are looking at conversion options, there are great opportunities to still leverage your existing infrastructure in the building and save considerably by taking common sense, low-cost solutions to your steam system balancing. Briefly on this, not only is there high energy costs for an imbalanced, inefficient heating system, you'll also have tenant complaints, lack of tenant comfort, loud banging pipes, and a lot of these solutions for these issues of an inefficient system are actually come from or included in the 13 measures of the affordable pathway, including master venting, TRVs, orifice plates we'll touch briefly on. That's a very excellent solution, but specifically for two-pipe steam system buildings. And success is only assured with a comprehensive and holistic steam system balancing approach. So BES, I mean, this is what we do. We'll go in and help a building diagnose any issues, find any imbalancing. And a lot of times when you fix one area, you start to see that there was overcompensation in another area. We really have to take a holistic approach to the steam system. And these are some of the common area and in-unit solutions. Again, these are pretty much all in the 13 measures. Orifice plates, just briefly about that. In two-pipe steam systems, orifice plates are engineered discs that go on the inlet side of the radiator and control the amount of steam coming in. BES, we're proud to say, I mean, we have some of the best engineers in this particular methodology. It's been very successful in helping buildings really maximize the efficiency of their heating system. And most importantly, maybe, is that it eliminates the need to have to replace your steam traps every 3 years or so. Steam traps, after 3, maximum maybe 5 years, they'll fail open, and they need to constantly be maintained, which is an added cost and maintenance to the building. When you have orifice plates, because you're kind of regulating the amount of steam that comes into the radiator, you bypass the need to have to constantly maintain those steam traps. So a lot of these measures that we just discussed, we approached with in a Bronx affordable high-rise building, 383 units. One another thing BES does is we help buildings identify and apply for and capture any energy incentives that we can, help cover the costs for the work. In this particular project, we did TRVs and orifice plates, common area steam traps, which is different than the in-unit ones, master venting, and boiler clean and tune. And these are post-project audited savings from Con Ed. You see, it's just below that 20% that we had mentioned before, using existing infrastructure, implementing these measures that are in the affordable pathway and you can really reduce your energy costs by about 20%. This is a recent project we did. The Cathedral of St. John Divine, New York City landmark church, surveyed and repaired all common area steam traps, unclogged all steam lines after years of neglect, and balanced the steam distribution system. Over 30,000 therms saved. We were proud to be awarded this job. So let's open it up now for some Q&A. I see we have some in the chat, and let me advance to the next screen. Here you'll have the contact information for the presenters. You can either take a screen capture or we will send out this deck afterwards. Let me open up this Q&A chat over here. See if we can. FYI, it was really hard to get the link. I really feel bad about that, Raphael. Apologize. Will these slides be sent to participants, or is there a link when we can find them? Yes, we will share the slides, and after we can upload a recording, we'll share that as well. Caleb answered. Thank you. This is from David. Our 6-story building with one pipe steam has recessed radiators in metal cabinets, which are properly vented and balanced with Gordon air valves. We have no complaints. There is no room for radiant barriers or TRVs. Are we compliant? We get A rating on annual benchmarking. Okay, so we actually just covered that, David. That came out in the new rules. If you're a one-pipe steam system and you have no complaints, then thankfully you are not required to put on TRVs and radiant barriers, which are required when TRVs are required. I hope that answers your question. And I think that's what we have in the chat. Are there anyone have questions in the audience? Now would be a time if you would like to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have a question. My name is
Sure.
Graham. I live in a small. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, I live in a. We live in a small. I'm on the board of a small HDFC in Harlem of just 12 units. It's less. It's like 13,000, 14,000 square feet. So it's under that 25,000. This is a little. It's a little overwhelming. So
Yeah.
Where should we start? I mean, obviously, what we need to do probably if. The building was renovated not so long ago, like maybe 8 years ago. So we might be partially compliant, but we just don't know where we stand. So what's the first step? Reach out to UHAB or the Accelerator program?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can
Go ahead,
jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so luckily, if you're under 25,000 square feet, you are not subject to local law 97. So you will not have to worry about compliance. That said, I mean, as we've kind of touched on before, a lot of these measures are things that will help you save money, help your building operate more efficiently. So regardless, definitely do touch base with myself, with Marissa, and we can talk about energy efficiency generally and what programs we can connect your building with to help lower the cost of some of those energy efficient upgrades if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, being a small HDFC, if you're smaller than 25,000 square feet, yeah, you are not subject to local law 97.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. I will reach out.
Great.
Great. Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions?
Yes. Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Sure,
Yeah,
Lawrence. Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Yes. You mentioned a 384 unit that you got a 17% reduction after, I guess, a prescriptive 13 in the how much did they spend on their prescriptive 13 per unit?
That's an excellent question, and I'm happy to look that up and follow up with you afterwards. If you don't mind shooting me an email, I don't have that number on me, but I will find that for you.
Okay. And our building, I'm not sure if we are covered under the prescriptive 13 or not, But let's assume for a minute we are not. So we would go to the accelerator program or otherwise would they develop a plan of what should be done to our building to reduce it? And then once they do a plan, how accurate is it? In other words, if they say we should, have heat pump water heating systems, or if they tell us we should have solar panels on the roof, how accurate are their predictions? Could we be in the situation where we do what accelerator unit suggests we do, and then it turns out we're still not compliant? Has that happened? What has been the accuracy of let's say New York City Accelerator program in determining what needs to be done and the success of it?
So it's a really good question. I'm gonna maybe ask Marissa to speak on that a little bit. I would just say from our experience that before we begin implementing measures, certainly when we're helping buildings apply for and capture energy incentives, we are doing pretty sophisticated calculations that determine pretty accurately the energy and therms that will be saved after those measures are implemented. And those numbers have come back, pretty accurately. But let me have Marissa speak a little bit on some of these recommendations Accelerator makes. Marissa?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. So for the Accelerator program, we're a advisory service. So we do have some engineers on our team that are able to come up with a long-term energy plan for your building. And, we have some good suggestions that point you in the right direction. However, we wouldn't give a full plan to say do this, this, and this, and you'll for sure be under your emission limits. We can reach out to different engineers and be able to put you in contact with different contractors like BES that would be the experts to then help make those really informed suggestions for your building. So we're a really good first step to come to then be able to point you in the right directions. But usually just speaking from working with other buildings and other projects we've seen, and depending on what your building's needs are, that's usually the type of determinations we'll make of, if you are on this type of system, this might be a really good way forward for you, and let me reach out to contractors to give you more information.
Okay, and one last question. Of the
Yeah.
buildings you have done this for, had plans which were implemented, what would you say the average cost per unit was?
That's a good question. I can definitely, as Ari said, I can absolutely share some information. I know that the Accelerator has some case studies on the website that will show you, pricing and what it looks like for the buildings to actually implement these measures. There have been a few buildings, and I know Ari gave a really good example of the projects that have actually implemented the prescriptive measures. So we can definitely share that information with you if you shoot us a quick email and, be able to give you those case studies.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I see that.
I just thought, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Ari.
No, go ahead, Marissa, please.
Yeah, I just saw another message in the chat from Paul saying that asking if there's any cost for getting consultation,
Okay.
And there's no cost for the New York City Accelerator program. It's a completely free advisory service through the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. So whatever type of direction you're looking for, definitely just reach out to us, and we can get you connected with the right people.
Okay, great. I do see that Megan was waiting with her hand up. Megan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Someone else from my building, Marie, is on this too. I think she's talked with Caleb. So we actually worked with the Accelerator program starting last year when Ian was there, and we just got our audit in January from Bright Power to go over everything. So we're kind of in a place right now where our building still burns oil. So a lot of the things that we want to get on that have incentives, because obviously we're an HDFC, we don't have a ton of operating extra income to do all these different changes. We're wondering what the best steps are for doing the upgrades, and is it working with Accelerator and UHAB to get the best possible outcome, because obviously we went through our audit And they would love to tell us, oh, heat pumps would help, this would help, but we don't have that kind of money, right? So we're trying to figure out our best plan for like this year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, so we can go to our board, have that discussion, and then tell our shareholders this is what we're doing. And obviously, we want to maximize incentives. And that's something that we don't qualify for most because we're still on oil. So we're trying to figure out what our best practices are going forward. And I will say, for other people who are here who haven't done Accelerator, we found it really helpful. I know Caleb, you've been a great help to Marie too, so thank you. But we are just feeling a little bit overwhelmed with options. So we got our audit paid for through NYC, which was great, but we're trying to decide, like, do we do prescriptive pathways? Do we do like through a CERTA program, and what's our best steps, just because we want to be efficient with fines coming up. And also, we'd like to be off oil, especially by next winter.
Yeah, all good questions. And I think, you have run up against something that is consistently becoming a problem for especially our HDFC community, which is that oil buildings, which as we know are the highest emitters, are their options are limited for incentive programs. This, from a policy perspective, to be frank, makes no sense for they should be targeted, basically, if the goal is greenhouse gas reductions in the long run. It's definitely a policy fight that we're working on and will continue to work on, and are expecting more incentives to come down the line. Yeah, for those of you who are oil buildings, please do reach out, and we will continue to work with you and come up with plans forward. I mean, of course, an option if you are using oil is to upgrade to gas, which is incentivized through AMEP, and of course, like, also once you make that conversion, are able to access AMEP incentives. So there certainly are paths forward. They might not be as clear for those buildings who are using gas and can use some of those utility incentives right off the bat. But yeah.
Okay, so
All right.
just one last, so what would be our best step going forward? Is it working with UHAB and Accelerator to go through like our audit that we got and then figuring out the right pathway? I can't remember if AMEP was the one where we had to get a property management company. There was one where it seemed like there was way too much oversight that wouldn't work for our building.
Yeah, I think I that's not Amy, but that's
Oh, okay.
there are certain programs that
PD, I think,
want you to
does that
sign a
one.
regulatory agreement with HPD, with the city,
Yeah.
if you're a co-op.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that that's what you had looked at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think setting up meetings with, or a meeting with myself and Marissa for you having KC3 would be good next steps, just so that we could spend a little more time individually talking about your building and going over all of the options that are out there
Right.
and talk about next steps.
And one last question. Do you know if there's going to be any more incentives coming for oil buildings? Like, I guess I'm just wondering if we should try to get on gas ASAP, so it's like something so we can start qualifying for these other ones and maybe get our windows fixed and start looking at that and try to make sure we can meet local law 97. Or is that just like, we just don't know? Because that, like you said, that's the worst part. Like, it would be great if we could get off oil, at least as a start, we could get way closer to our energy goals. But there's nothing really for us right now, which is really frustrating.
Yeah, it's a good question, and one to which there isn't a clear answer. We have been told, yes, there are going to be more options. I don't think we're kind of running out of time here in a way, and I think that, like, there's been no clear plan proposed. Of course, there is federal funding coming down the line, but again, we have been given kind of like vague timelines for that. So yeah, again, something I'd definitely be happy to go over in more detail, kind of with anyone individually.
Excuse me, there's a kind of cryptic note in the December of 23 regulations that says something about electrification subsidies and grants, which are going to be available. Do you know what I'm referring to?
I would
don't have-
assume
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Caleb.
I would assume that that's in reference to the Inflation Reduction Act funding, which I just referenced. I can drop some links in the chat just about this. There are going to be for low and moderate income residents in New York State a direct rebate program for electrification equipment like induction stoves and heat pumps. But it's the state has to come up with a plan for how they're going to like disperse that funding, and they haven't finished it yet. There's some information out there online which I can link right after I'm done speaking. But yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caleb. There were two questions. David asked, does BES do the LL81 10-year audit and retro commissioning study? We can certainly help, David. Please be in touch after the presentation, and we'll work to help get you set up. And Denzel asks, how can we know how many certificates we accomplished so far? I'm not sure which certificates Denzel is referring to specifically.
I think that's a UHAB question.
Oh, sorry.
So
sorry.
yeah, no worries. So Denzel, you can email me and we can talk about that offline. There are I know you've taken a couple of classes, like this is with the climate and resiliency team here. There's also our operation and maintenance training, and we have just our regular training classes. So I'll help you figure that out. Just shoot me an email. It's on the screen there, while@uhab.org, of course.
Okay, so we're coming up just about to the hour. Any last question maybe we can take?
I just want to add on the oil conversation. I know, Megan, that it's super overwhelming, especially for buildings on oil, because you kind of feel like, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, especially if you're on oil number 4. And if there's anyone else on the call, if your building is currently on oil number 4, there is that oil number 4 phase out that is beginning this year. And by 2027, your building will have to be off number 4 oil. So it's a super important conversation to have right now. I think Caleb is correct. Definitely reach out to us and we can go over the study that you've done and kind of figure out the best way forward and present you with your options. There are a couple options for oil for buildings that are on oil looking to come off of it and comply with Local Law 97. And one of them, of course, is electrifying and putting in heat pumps. The other one is completing the prescriptive measures, maybe going on to gas and get those incentives. There are contractors that do all of those type of work. So just reach out to us, and then we can, of course, start to reach out to the people who can get us the best information. And then, you can look over your options and see what's the best way forward.
Question from Edward here. Where can we get classes to understand the specifics for those of us that are new to the whole situation? Maybe there's some online training that Accelerator has. I know you have, I'm not sure if that would be relevant for this, but
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, okay, good.
If you are referencing, if you're referencing Local Law 97, the Accelerator team, in partnership with HPD, does a Local Law 97 training every other week. So if you are interested, send me a quick email. I'll send you the link to the next training. There's also those trainings that are recorded. So I can send you a recording to that training. I know this has been recorded as well, so you can definitely look over that. Look at all the links that are included on the training document, because I think that all of those are a good first step. And then definitely reach out to Accelerator, reach out to UHAB. We can review your building and see what would be, the best way forward, and just kind of get you up to speed. If you are kind of feeling a little bit lost, or if you're kind of at the beginning of the compliance journey, we can figure it out for you.
All right, thank you very much, Marissa. I just want to thank everybody again for attending and for joining us and for having patience with us at the beginning. Thank you very much to Caleb at UHAB and Marissa at New York City Accelerator. Please reach out with any questions. We're always available to help, and wishing everybody a good evening. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.